I've seen wars end and begin again. I've watched technology change from rotary phones to devices that fit in your pocket and can reach anyone, anywhere in the world. I've witnessed the slow, inevitable march of time as it carved lines into my face, turned my hair silver, and stole away the people I love most, one by one, like precious jewels being plucked from a crown until only I remained. My name is Samuel Johnson. I'm 76 years old now. For most of my life, that name meant something. It meant hard work and integrity. It meant a man who provided for his family, who kept his promises, who believed in doing right even when it cost him dearly. I worked in construction for 42 years, 42 long years of early mornings and aching muscles, of sweat and sacrifice. Every brick I laid, every beam I helped raise, I did it for them, for my family, for the future I was building, not just in steel and concrete, but in the lives of those I loved. Before I walk you through this story, tell me your name, the city you're watching from, and what time it is for you. All right, my wife, Margaret, passed away 3 years ago. 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days, if we're counting. And believe me, I count. Every single day, without her, feels like a lifetime. She was my compass, my true north, the one who could look at me and know exactly what I was thinking before I even opened my mouth. 51 years we were married. 51 years of shared dreams, shared struggles, shared silences that meant more than 1,000 conversations ever could. When she died, something inside me died too. I don't mean that in some poetic, metaphorical sense. I mean something fundamental shifted in my understanding of the world. The colors seemed less bright. Food lost its taste. Music became just noise. I felt like a ship that had lost its anchor, drifting in dark waters with no shore in sight. My son Daniel, my only child, the boy I held in my arms the moment he came into this world, red-faced and screaming with the indignation of new life. He insisted I move in with him after Margaret passed. At first, I resisted. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to impose on his life, his marriage, his family. I'd always been independent, you see. Always been the one others leaned on, not the other way around. But Daniel was persistent. Dad, he said, you can't stay in that house alone. All those memories, all those empty rooms. It's not good for you. Come stay with us. Emily and I have plenty of space. The kids would love to have their grandfather around more. Please, Dad, do it for us, if not for yourself. So I agreed. I packed up my life, 76 years condensed into boxes and suitcases, and moved into the guest room of my son's beautiful home in the suburbs. A home he could afford because of the money I'd set aside for his education, the connections I'd made in construction business that helped him get a start, the values I'd instilled in him about hard work and perseverance. At first, it was nice, different, but nice. My grandchildren, Emma and Michael, would knock on my door in the mornings, asking me to tell them stories about the old days. Emily, my daughter-in-law, seemed genuinely happy to have me there. She'd ask my opinion on things, include me in family decisions, make sure I felt like part of the household rather than just a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. But slowly, imperceptibly, things began to change. It started with small things, little moments I tried to ignore, telling myself I was being oversensitive, paranoid in my old age. Daniel would come home from work tense and irritable, and I'd catch him looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Frustration? Resentment? Exhaustion? I wasn't sure, but it made something twist uncomfortably in my gut. Emily stopped asking my opinion. She stopped making eye contact during dinner conversations. The warmth that had initially welcomed me into their home began to cool, degree by degree, until I felt like I was living in a house where I was merely tolerated, not wanted. The grandchildren still visited my room, but less frequently, and when they did, there was something rushed about it, as if they were sneaking away to see me, as if spending time with their grandfather had become something they had to hide. I tried to make myself useful. I fixed things around the house. A leaky faucet here, a squeaky door there. I kept my room immaculate. I tried to stay out of the way, to make myself as small and unobtrusive as possible. I thought if I could just prove that I wasn't a burden, that I could contribute, that I deserved the space I occupied, then things would go back to how they were. But they didn't. Instead, the tension grew thicker, heavier, like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. You could feel it in the air, taste it like copper on your tongue. Something was building, something inevitable, and I was powerless to stop it. It was supposed to be a peaceful evening, a family dinner to celebrate the new year. Emily had spent all day cooking, preparing a feast that filled the house with the warm, comforting smells of roasted meat and fresh bread. The dining room table was set with a good china, the candles were lit, and for a moment, just a brief, precious moment, I allowed myself to hope that maybe this dinner would be a turning point. Maybe we could all sit together as a family and remember why we loved each other, remember what truly mattered. I should have known better. We sat down to eat just as the sun was setting, painting the sky outside in shades of orange and pink that reminded me of Margaret. She loved sunsets. She'd always stop whatever she was doing to watch them, claiming that each one was a gift, a small miracle we too often took for granted. I wonder what she would think if she could see us now, her family, sitting at this beautiful table in this beautiful house, and yet feeling miles apart from one another. The dinner started quietly, too quietly, the kind of silence that feels loaded, pregnant with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. Daniel was cutting his food with more force than necessary, the knife scraping against the plate in a way that set my teeth on edge. Emily was moving food around her plate without actually eating much of it, her eyes distant, focused on something only she could see. Emma and Michael, sensing the tension, were unusually subdued. They ate quickly, heads down, as if hoping that by making themselves small and quiet, they could somehow escape whatever was about to happen. I tried to break the silence, to lighten the mood. "Emily, this roast is absolutely delicious," I said, forcing cheerfulness into my voice. "You've really outdone yourself." She looked up at me, and for just a second, I saw something in her eyes. Sadness? Guilt? It was gone before I could identify it, replaced by a small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, Dad," she said softly, and then looked back down at her plate. "Dad." She called me Dad. That should have warmed my heart, but instead, it felt like a farewell, like she was already mourning something that hadn't happened yet. Daniel said nothing. He just kept cutting his meat, drinking his wine. His jaw clenched so tight, I thought his teeth might crack from pressure. I should have stayed quiet. I should have just eaten my dinner in silence and let the evening pass. But I couldn't. The tension was suffocating me, and I needed to break it, needed to understand what was happening to my family. "Daniel," I said carefully, "is everything all right? You seem troubled." That's when it happened. Then, without any warning, my son Daniel slammed his glass down onto the table with such force, I thought it might shatter. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room, and everyone jumped. Wine sloshed over the rim, spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. His voice boomed through the room like thunder, like the voice of God pronouncing judgment. "That's it, Dad. Pack your belongings. Nobody needs you in this house." The words hung in the air, sharp and cruel, cutting through every illusion I'd been clinging to. Nobody needs you. Not we can't support you anymore. Not this arrangement isn't working. But nobody needs you. I felt the words hit me like physical blows, each syllable a hammer striking my chest, driving the breath from my lungs. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't think. I just sat there, my fork frozen halfway in my mouth, staring at my son, this man who had my eyes, my nose, my stubborn chin, and I didn't recognize him. Emma had tears streaming down her face. Michael had gone pale, his hands gripping the edge of the table, so hard his knuckles were white. But neither of them said a word. They just stared at their father in shock and horror, as if he'd transformed into a stranger right before their eyes. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own son telling me to leave? How did we get here? What had I done to deserve this? I felt a cold knot in my chest, tightening with every breath, every heartbeat. This was the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, holding onto the seat as he pedaled, running alongside him until he found his balance. This was a young man I'd stayed up with all night when his mother was sick, both of us keeping vigil, both of us praying. This was a person I'd loved unconditionally, without reservation, from the moment he entered this world. And now he was looking at me with eyes full of anger and resentment, as if I were an unwanted guest, an intruder who'd worn out his welcome. "Daniel," I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper, "I don't understand. What did I do? Please, tell me what I did wrong, and I'll fix it. I'll make it right." But he just shook his head, his face red with emotion I couldn't decipher. Was it anger? Shame? Frustration? All of the above? "This isn't about one thing, Dad," he said, his voice still loud, but now edged with something that sounded almost like pain. "It's everything. You're always here, always underfoot, always watching, always judging. I can't breathe in my own house. Emily can't breathe. We need our space back. We need our lives back." His words were like acid, burning through every defense I'd built up, every rationalization I created to explain away the growing distance between us. I thought I'd been helping. I thought I'd been making myself useful, staying out of the way, being the perfect house guest. But apparently, I'd been wrong. Apparently, my very presence was suffocating them. "I never meant to. I started, but he cut me off." "I know you never meant to," he said. And now his voice was weary, exhausted, as if this confrontation had drained every ounce of energy from his body. "But that doesn't change anything. I need you to leave, Dad. I need you to pack your things and go." "Go where?" I wanted to ask. I'm 76 years old. My wife is dead. I sold the house after Margaret passed. Where exactly am I supposed to go? But I didn't say any of that. Pride, that stubborn Johnson pride that had sustained me through so many hardships, kept the words locked in my throat. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't plead. If my son didn't want me here, then I would leave. I would find somewhere else to be. Somehow, even if I had no idea where that somewhere might be. But then, as if the anger in my son's voice wasn't enough, his wife, Emily, the woman I thought I knew, the woman who had called me Dad just minutes earlier, slowly rose from her seat. Her eyes were filled with sorrow, yet there was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. For a moment, I thought she might speak out in my defense, maybe calm things down. Daniel's outburst was shocking, yes, but Emily had always been the peacemaker in the family. She was the one who smoothed over conflicts, who found compromises, who reminded everyone that family was worth fighting for, worth preserving even when things got difficult. But what happened next? Nobody, not even I, could have imagined. Emily stood there, her hands clasped in front of her, and I could see she was trembling. Her face was pale, and there were tears pooling in her eyes, threatening to spill over. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, as if the words were too heavy, too painful to release into the world. The children were watching her now, hope written across their young faces. Hope that Mom would fix this, that she would make everything okay like she always did. Hope that she would stand up to Dad, tell him he was being unreasonable, remind him that family doesn't give up on each other. I was watching her too, with that same desperate hope. Emily had always been kind to me. Even when the distance between us grew, even when I could feel the walls going up, she'd never been cruel. She'd never been harsh. She'd just been absent, withdrawn, but never actively hurtful. Until now, instead of standing up for me, instead of defending our family, she turned to me with those sorrowful eyes, then said, "You should go, Dad." Those words cut through me deeper than anything my son had said. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Everything went quiet, not just a room, but inside my head, inside my heart. It was as if someone had pressed a pause button on reality, freezing this moment in time so I could fully experience every excruciating second of it. My daughter-in-law, the woman who had welcomed me into her home, who had smiled at me across the breakfast table, who had asked me to help her garden because she valued my experience, who had once told me that having me there made her feel like she still had a father after losing her own. This woman was now telling me to leave, not with anger like Daniel, not with resentment or frustration, but with sorrow, with resignation, as if she'd agonized over this decision, as if it cost her something to say those words, but she'd said them anyway, and somehow that made it worse. Daniel's anger I could understand, even if I couldn't accept it. Anger was simple, straightforward. It could be addressed, confronted, hopefully resolved. But Emily's sorrowful acceptance, her gentle dismissal, felt like a door closing softly but permanently. It felt like a judgment that had been carefully considered and found me wanting. The tears that had been pooling in her eyes finally spilled over, running down her cheeks in silent streams. "I'm sorry," she whispered, so softly I almost didn't hear it. "I'm so sorry." But she didn't take it back. She didn't say she didn't mean it. She just stood there, crying, waiting for me to accept this verdict that she and my son had apparently reached together. I stood there, in shock, trying to understand what just happened. My son's betrayal was one thing, but to have his wife, my daughter-in-law, tell me to leave? That was too much. How did it come to this? I looked around the table, at each face in turn, trying to find some anchor in this storm, some piece of solid ground to stand on. Emma was crying openly now, her small shoulders shaking with sobs. Michael was staring at his plate, his jaw set in a way that reminded me, heartbreakingly, of his father. Daniel wouldn't meet my eyes, focusing instead on his clenched fists resting on the table. And Emily was still crying silently, her sorrow filling the room like fog. How did we get here? How did this family, this unit that was supposed to be unbreakable, that was supposed to weather any storm together, fracture so completely? I thought back over the months I'd been living here, replaying every interaction, every conversation, every moment I tried to be helpful or stay out of the way. Where I'd gone wrong. When did my presence shift from welcome to burdensome? At what point did I become the problem that needed to be removed? Was it when I fixed the garden gate without asking first? Daniel had seemed irritated by that, muttering something about having his own plans for it. Or when I offered advice about Michael's school project. Emily had given me a strange look then, as if I'd overstepped some invisible boundary. Or maybe it was all the small things combined. The way I always woke up early and made coffee, the way I liked to read in the living room, the way I had opinions about current events during dinner conversations. I'd been trying so hard to be useful, to prove that I still had value, that I could contribute to this household. But maybe that was a problem. Maybe they didn't want me to be useful. Maybe they just wanted me to not be there at all. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. I knew I needed to say something, to respond somehow, but what could I possibly say? What words could bridge this chasm that had opened up between us? "I see," I finally said, and my voice sounded strange in my own ears, hollow, distant, like it was coming from very far away. "I understand." But I didn't understand. Not really. How could I understand that the people I loved most in the world, the people I'd sacrificed everything for, wanted me gone? How could I make sense of being unwanted by the family I'd built with my own two hands? "Dad, Daniel started, but I held up my hand to stop him. "No," I said, and now there was steel in my voice, that old Johnson strength rising up from somewhere deep inside. "You've said what you needed to say. Both of you. I heard you loud and clear." I pushed my chair back from the table, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed obscenely loud in the quiet room. I stood up slowly, my joints protesting, reminding me of my age, of how many years had passed, of how much time had worn me down. "I'll pack my things tonight," I said, looking at Daniel, then at Emily. "I'll be gone by morning." Emma let out a small sob, and I felt my heart crack a little more. My granddaughter, my sweet Emma, who used to climb into my lap and ask me to tell her stories about her grandmother. She was watching her family fall apart, and there was nothing I could do to protect her from it. "Emma, Michael," I said, turning to them, "I want you to know that I love you both very much. None of this is your fault. Sometimes adults make decisions that don't make sense, that hurt people, but that doesn't mean you did anything wrong. Remember that." They both nodded, tears streaming down their faces, and I had to look away before my own composure shattered completely. I gestured vaguely toward the hallway, unable to finish the sentence. "I'll just what? Leave? Disappear? Cease to exist as far as this family is concerned?" I walked out of that dining room with as much dignity as I could muster, my back straight, my head held high, but inside I was crumbling. Inside I was screaming. Inside I was that little boy I'd once been, lost and afraid and desperate for someone to tell him everything would be okay. The walk to my room felt endless. Every step was an effort, as if I were wading through deep water. My room, the guest room that had never quite felt like mine, despite living there for months. It had always felt temporary, borrowed, a space I was occupying until something better came along. I just never imagined that something better would be forced upon me like this. I closed the door behind me and stood in the middle of the room, looking around at my meager possessions. A few changes of clothes, some books, photographs of Margaret, of Daniel as a child, of happier times. How could 76 years of life be reduced to so little? I sat down on the edge of the bed, that bed I'd slept in every night for months, and felt the weight of everything finally crash down on me. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a pain so intense it was almost physical. It radiated from my chest outward, numbing my extremities, making it hard to breathe. My son didn't want me. My daughter-in-law didn't want me. I was a burden, an inconvenience, a problem to be solved by removing me from the equation. And the worst part? I understood why. I could see it from their perspective. An old man taking up space in their home, disrupting their routines, making them feel obligated to care for someone when they had their own lives, their own children, their own problems to deal with. I got it. I really did. But understanding didn't make it hurt any less. I thought about Margaret then, really thought about her in a way I hadn't allowed myself to do in a long time. If she were here, none of this would be happening. She was the glue that held our family together, the heart that made it all work. She knew how to navigate the complicated dynamics between me and Daniel, how to smooth over disagreements, how to remind us both of what mattered most. Without her, we were just two stubborn men who didn't know how to talk to each other, who couldn't find common ground, who let hurt feelings and unspoken resentments build up until they exploded in moments like tonight. Margaret, I whispered into the empty room, what do I do now? But there was no answer. There would never be an answer. She was gone, and I was here, alone, trying to figure out how to navigate a world that had become unrecognizable. I stood up and opened the closet, pulling out the same suitcases I'd arrived with months ago. They'd been gathering dust, pushed to the back of the closet, waiting for a day I never thought would come. Now here I was, pulling them out, preparing to pack up my life once again. As I began folding clothes and placing in the suitcase, my hands moved mechanically, automatically, while my mind raced in 1,000 different directions. Where would I go? I had some savings, enough to rent a small apartment, maybe. I could look into senior living facilities, though the thought made something in me recoil. I wasn't ready for that yet. I wasn't ready to be warehoused with other forgotten old people, waiting to die. Maybe I could reach out to old friends, see if anyone had a spare room. But most of my friends were either dead or in similar situations themselves, living with their children or in nursing homes. The few who were still independent barely had enough space for themselves, let alone a house guest. I heard a soft knock on the door and froze. For a moment I hoped, desperately, pathetically hoped, that it was Daniel or Emily, coming to apologize, to tell me they'd spoken in anger and didn't mean it, to ask me to stay. "Grandpa," came Emma's small voice. I set down the shirt I was folding and opened the door. Emma stood there in her pajamas, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Without a word, she threw her arms around my waist and hugged me tight. "Please don't go," she whispered against my chest. "Please, Grandpa, I need you here." I held my granddaughter, my sweet Emma, and felt my heart break all over again. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, stroking her hair. "Sometimes things happen that we don't want, that we don't understand. But your parents, they've made their decision." "But it's not fair," she said, pulling back to look up at me. "You didn't do anything wrong. Why are they being so mean?" How could I explain this to her? How could I make her understand that sometimes love isn't enough, that sometimes the people we care about hurt us not because they're evil, but because they're human and flawed and carrying their own pain? "They're not being mean, Emma," I said gently. They're doing what they think is best. And we have to respect that, even if we don't agree with it. But where will you go? Who will take care of you?" "I'll take care of myself," I wanted to say. I've been doing it for 76 years. But looking down at her worried face, I realized that wasn't what she needed to hear. I'll be fine, I said instead, mustering up a smile I didn't feel. I'm tougher than I look. And you can visit me once I get settled somewhere. We'll still see each other. She didn't look convinced, but she nodded anyway. I love you, Grandpa. I love you too, sweetheart. So much. Don't ever forget that. After Emma left, I continued packing, moving through the motions in a fog of grief and disbelief. Each item I placed in the suitcase felt like I was packing away a piece of myself, a piece of the life I tried to build here. I picked up a photograph of Margaret, taken on our 20th anniversary. She was laughing at something I'd said, her whole face lit up with joy. God, she was beautiful. Even after all those years, she could still make my heart skip a beat with just a smile. I miss you, I said to the photograph. I miss you so much it feels like I'm missing a limb. You'd know what to do right now. You'd know how to fix this. But would she? Or was this break inevitable? Something that had been building for years, held back only by her presence? Maybe without her here to mediate. To smooth things over, Daniel and I were destined to drift apart like this. Maybe we'd never been as close as I thought we were. That thought hurt more than anything else. The idea that the relationship I believed in, the bond I thought was unbreakable, had been an illusion all along. That I'd been fooling myself, seeing what I wanted to see rather than what was actually there. I heard footsteps in the hallway again, heavier this time. They paused outside my door, and I waited, wondering if Daniel had come to, what? Apologize? Explain? Make sure I was actually leaving? The footsteps moved on, and I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. By midnight, I was finished packing. Everything I own in the world fit into 2 suitcases and a small bag. Tomorrow morning, I would call a cab, load up my things, and leave this house for the last time. I would find somewhere to go. Somehow, I had to. What choice did I have? As I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. Every decision, every mistake, every path not taken. I thought about the years I'd spent working, providing, building a life for my family. I thought about the sacrifices Margaret and I had made, the dreams we deferred, the things we'd gone without so that Daniel could have better. And for what? So that he could throw me out of his home when I became inconvenient? So that I could end up alone, unwanted, with nowhere to go? But even as I thought these bitter thoughts, I knew they weren't entirely fair. Daniel wasn't a bad person. He was stressed, overwhelmed, trying to balance his own family's needs with his obligations to me. And I had been living in his house, depending on his generosity, taking up space in his life. Maybe he'd reached his breaking point. Maybe we all have breaking points, places where the weight of our responsibilities becomes too much to bear. Still, the way it happened, the words he'd used, nobody needs you, those would stay with me, those would haunt me in the quiet moments, in the lonely hours, reminding me of my own worthlessness in the eyes of the people who were supposed to love me most. As I stood there in the silence of the room, with everyone frozen in disbelief, I realized something. Things would never be the same again. What happens when the ones you love the most become the ones who hurt you the most? That question echoed through my mind, demanding an answer I didn't have. How do you reconcile love with pain? How do you hold on to the good memories when they're overshadowed by this moment of rejection? How do you forgive when forgiveness feels impossible? The sky outside my window was beginning to lighten, the deep black of night fading to dark blue. Morning was coming, whether I was ready for it or not. In a few hours, I would leave this house, this family, this life I tried so hard to hold on to. But something had shifted inside me during that long, sleepless night. The initial shock and hurt were still there, still raw and painful, but underneath it, something else was emerging. Not anger, exactly, though there was some of that. Not bitterness, though I'd be lying if I said I wasn't bitter. No, what I felt was a strange kind of clarity, a recognition that I'd been holding on to something that was already gone. The family I thought I had, the place I thought I belonged, those things had been slipping away for a long time. Tonight had just made it impossible to ignore anymore. Maybe that was the real gift of this terrible evening, not the rejection itself, but the end of my own self-deception, the forced acceptance that I couldn't go back, couldn't recreate what had been lost when Margaret died, couldn't force my way into a space where I was no longer wanted. I had to move forward, whatever that meant. I had to find a new way to live, a new purpose, a new understanding of who I was and what my life could be at 76 years old with no family to lean on. The thought terrified me, but it also sparked something, a tiny flame of determination, of stubborn Johnson pride that refused to be completely extinguished. I'd survived worse than this. I'd lived through wars, through poverty, through loss. I could survive this too. I thought about all the people I'd known over the years who'd faced similar situations. Old friends who'd been cast aside by their families, who'd ended up in nursing homes or tiny apartments, forgotten and alone. I'd always felt sorry for them, grateful that would never be me. How wrong I'd been. But maybe their stories didn't have to be my story. Maybe there was another way, another path I couldn't see yet, but that would reveal itself once I started walking. I heard movement in the house now, the sound of coffee being made, of morning routines beginning. Soon, Daniel would leave for work. Emily would get the kids ready for school, and life would go on as if nothing had changed. As if they hadn't torn their family apart last night. I got out of bed, showered, and dressed carefully in my best clothes. If I was going to leave, I would leave with dignity. I would not slink away like a beaten dog. I would walk out of this house with my head held high, my shoulders straight, showing them that Samuel Johnson was made of stronger stuff than they thought. When I emerged from my room, pulling my suitcases behind me, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I could hear voices in the kitchen, hushed and urgent, but they stopped as soon as I appeared. Daniel was there, dressed for work, a cup of coffee in his hand. Emily was packing lunches for the kids. They both looked up as I entered, and I saw something flash across their faces. Guilt? Regret? Relief that I was actually leaving? Dad. Daniel started, but I held up my hand. I called a cab. I said, "It'll be here in 10 minutes. I just wanted to say goodbye. The words hung in the air, final and irrevocable. Emma and Michael appeared in the doorway, still in their pajamas, their eyes wide and scared. Emma was holding back tears, trying to be brave. Michael looked angry, his jaw clenched in that way that reminded me so much of his father. "I want you all to know," I said, looking at each of them in turn, "that I love you. Whatever happens, wherever I go, that will never change. You're my family, and nothing can take that away." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, But I shook my head. "It's all right, Emily. You don't have to explain. You don't have to apologize. You and Daniel made your decision, and I respect that. I just want you to be happy. All of you." A car horn sounded outside. My cab had arrived. "That's my ride," I said, forcing lightness into my voice that I didn't feel. "Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other." I picked up my suitcases and walked toward the door. Behind me, I could hear Emma crying, could feel the weight of 4 pairs of eyes watching me leave. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I looked back, if I saw their faces one more time, I might break down completely, might beg them to let me stay, might abandon every shred of dignity I had left. So I kept walking out the door, down the driveway, to the waiting cab. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, helped me load my suitcases into the trunk. "Where to?" he asked as we settled into the car. Where to indeed. I gave him the address of a motel I'd stayed at once years ago. It wasn't much, but it would do for now, while I figured out my next move. As we pulled away from the curb, I couldn't help myself. I looked back at the house. Standing in the doorway was Emma, her small hand raised in a wave. I waved back, watching as the house grew smaller in the distance, until it disappeared completely around a corner. And just like that, it was over. That chapter of my life closed. The family I tried to hold on to, gone. The future I'd imagined, erased. But I was still here, still breathing, still alive. And as long as I was alive, there was still a chance to rebuild, to reinvent myself, to find new meaning and purpose. It wouldn't be easy. It would hurt like hell. But I'd done hard things before. I could do them again. The cab driver was watching me in the rearview mirror. "You okay back there?" he asked. Was I okay? That was a complicated question with a complicated answer. "I will be," I finally said. "Eventually I will be." And as we drove through the awakening city, past houses full of families beginning their days, I realized something important. My story wasn't over. Last night felt like an ending, like a death of sorts. But maybe it was also a beginning. Maybe being forced to leave was the push I needed to finally start living for myself rather than for others. I didn't know what came next. I had no plan, no destination beyond that motel. But for the first time since Margaret died, I felt something other than grief and loss. I felt possibility. It was a small feeling, tentative and fragile, easily crushed. But it was there, flickering like a candle in the darkness. What happens when the ones you love the most become the ones who hurt you the most? I still didn't have a complete answer to that question. But maybe the beginning of an answer was this. You survive. You adapt. You find a way to keep going. Not because you want to, but because the alternative is giving up entirely. And I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Samuel Johnson, 76 years old, widower, father, grandfather, had been cast out. But he was still standing, still fighting, still hoping that somewhere out there was a place for him, a purpose waiting to be discovered. The sun was fully up now, bright and warm, streaming through the cab windows. A new day, a new beginning. I closed my eyes and thought of Margaret one more time. "I'll be okay," I whispered to her memory. "I don't know how, but I'll find a way. I promise." And somewhere, somehow, I believe she heard me. The story of what happened that night, of how my son told me to leave and his wife agreed, would stay with me forever. It would be a scar I carried, a wound that might never fully heal. But scars are proof of survival. They're evidence that we endured something painful and lived to tell about it. So yes, things would never be the same again. The family I knew was broken, perhaps beyond repair. The future I'd imagined was gone, but I was still here. And that had to count for something. That had to be enough to build on, to grow from, to transform into whatever came next. As the cab carried me toward an uncertain future, I made myself a promise. I would not let this break me. I would not let the rejection define me. I would find a way to live with purpose and dignity, with or without them, because in the end, that's all we can do when life tears away everything we thought we knew. We survive. We adapt. We keep going. And maybe, if we're lucky, we find that we're stronger than we ever imagined possible. That was my hope, anyway. As the city rushed past outside the window, and a new chapter of my life began, ready or not. I'm still grappling with that night, and I wonder what I should have done differently. What would you have done in my shoes? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. I want to hear your stories too.